Hi, everybody. Today I want to talk really briefly about carbon sequestration with some nice illustrations. And this slide shows the range of processes that we talk about when we discuss carbon sequestration, both human derived that we'll talk about in the next few slides and more natural approaches. Approaches like planting trees that will conduct photosynthesis and draw down CO2, or even spurring productivity in the oceans by loading iron and causing phytoplankton to bloom and draw down more CO2 via photosynthesis. So these are the approaches that we talk about. And in this slide, we can see in much more detail what happens. The most commonly applied approach today is when you have a power plant and you're burning off fossil fuels and deriving CO2. You can take this CO2 and inject it directly underground. And one of the approaches that has been used often now actually is what's called enhanced oil recovery, where you pump it down and you use the CO2 to force more oil out of wells. And that leads to more production. And so this is sort of a win-win situation where you bury the CO2 from the power plant and you push that CO2 down under the ground and force more oil out from under the ground that you can then recover. You can also bury it in coal mines where the CO2 would react with coal. And then the other thing that you can do is you can pump that CO2 down into what's called a saline aquifer, where the CO2 will then react with minerals and hopefully stay underground for a long time. These are all approaches that require the substrate to be fairly solid and geologically stable. You would not be doing this in an area with earthquakes, for example. So these are techniques that have been employed. Saline aquifers have been used in places like the North Sea, enhanced oil recovery in numerous places. And so this is tried and true, these techniques. So what we're talking about actually more is this sort of an idea where you'll produce natural gas, and you'll capture it, and you can capture it in a bunch of different ways. One thing would be directly, as was shown in the last slide, but also you could have capture from the atmosphere and scrubbing from the atmosphere, and then you can then actually transport it to somewhere else where it's safe to bury it. So it's more likely that you're going to have a situation like this where you have a power plant, not necessarily an area where you can bury it directly, or you capture it from the atmosphere. Then you transport it via pipe, and then you bury it under the ground. So these are the sorts of processes that are being talked about in carbon capture and geological sequestration. And that is it for today.